We have Denise Luna Acevedo, as we call her Denise Luna, AKA. And let me introduce briefly to Denise, and then I will introduce Alex Alejandro Santander, whom we call Alex, our friend. And Denise is an architect, researcher, and professor from Mexico. And as today we have an international presenters. She studied architecture at Universidad Iberoamericana in Tijuana. She was a researcher in the program, The New Normal, iteration 2018 at Stelka Institute, where she was with prestigious Benjamin Breton, and where she collaborated in research and design projects for cities, exploring the impact of emerging technologies on new types of interdisciplinary design process and practices. She is a recipient of full certificate scholarship for the Post-Planetary Universal Design Program at the New Center of Research and Practice. Denise is a partner of ESTUDIO Santander, co-director of TIOC, think tank, and co-founder of SALA. You will probably know a little bit more about SALA. She recently authored Dispositivos de Adhesion, the designers que designan. Horrible Spanish right now. In the book, Repensar dos Designers, from UABC and Figuras Femeninas Planetarias in Agencia magazine. Her work intends to seek alternative architecture practices and explore the possibilities of diverse techniques through thinking and practice at a planetary scale, especially from Latin American context. Alex Santander is a principal of Estudio Santander. The office practices architecture, urbanism, and design through rigorous research of the underlying contemporary conditions as it seeks to delineate potentialities and possibilities of design strategies toward other realities. Director of TIOC, a think tank concentrated on research for the construction of possible system of governance through decentralized system of commitments and the real-time negotiations that organize the resultant temporary morphology of architecture city. Work is focused on the conceptual, theoretical, and computational themes of interest range from same human conditions, alternative co-evaluation systems, and the construction of Zeno onto political realities. Co-founder and director of SALA, also a platform outlet for exploration and debate on architecture's world-making possibilities with a particular interest in the variations of many Latin Americas. Variations of many. SALA seeks to engage in the most pressing and urgent conditions that shape the notions of Latin America. Recognized with regional, national, and international awards, and participated in exhibitions and biennales in United States, Mexico, Europe, and Asia, including the 2017 Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism and Venice Biennale of Architecture in 2018 and 2021. Now, I didn't want to bypass this, of course, in words from Alexis Navarro about who we are at East Los Angeles College Architecture Department.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Very good. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could make it today on this beautiful afternoon, wherever you're at. I am Alexis Navarro, Chair of Architecture at East Los Angeles College. I'm joined by my colleagues, Professor Ingolil Warus Ritter and Orhan Ajuge. And I don't see Scott Callahan here yet. He will probably join us later on.
He's here.
And oh, excellent. Scott Callahan is here, another professor and colleague. And along with many of our students, glad to have you here and to begin the 2023 Spring Architecture Lecture Series, sponsored by the ELAC Architecture Alumni Group. And at ELAC, we have one of the largest in scope and breadth of courses in architecture for a community college since 1945. And we have a host of programs and education classes throughout the day, both day and night and weekends, to prepare students to go out and get certificates, get a job, all of the major universities here in Southern California and throughout the United States. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Denise and Alex to our lecture series and turn it back to you, Orhan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, Denise. You take over now.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit sore on the throat, so I will pause and probably take time to rearrange my voice. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you, first of all, Orhan, for inviting us here, and thank you, ELAC, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. And thank you everyone else who is watching, faculty or students or otherwise, and listening to our conversation. Inside this conversation, we plan to map and dismantle ways of thinking that may influence our practices as architects, designers, and other disciplines as well. We therefore invite you to our discussion here and regard it as a conversation starter. These ideas and concepts that we are developing with Alex and ours, are not finalized. They are continuation that help us underline pockets of invisibility in our work, our discipline, our practice, and our world. So enjoy. Architecture may be seen as materialized future. It is a future-making discipline and practice. Thus, we are future builders and future enablers. These futures, however, have been fully charged with specific biases, agendas, and intentions, meaning that these materialized futures are not big-scale totalities, as we would like to believe, but also significantly localized and grounded in small manifestations. The production of futures, nevertheless, is not the main question here. The question lies in the techniques taken toward a manifestation of a project. It is about pragma, which means practices, and its source. The fact that we can imagine futures is admirable. However, it is meaningless if we cannot reflect on the grounds that play a significant role in thinking and imagining those futures. Without this ability, we are left with what the world dictates and directs us into, what we should think, what we should imagine and practice. For instance, sustainability and discourse adopted literally into our practices flattens what we do as architects. We follow best practices as well-packaged product. And we also tend to mimic the so-called natural, or are reduced to naming bees as architects because their structures function better than ours. What are the consequences of our existing given modes of thinking and practice? The design construction of our human cities extend to an extreme these tendencies, and they will remain the same without a clear revision of our humanity and practices. Therefore, it does not become a question of the final product of design, the object, but a question of pragma. We can no longer design under the same irrelevant, complete, problematic concepts and canons. Who or what is in fact accountable? What systems of measuring, negotiating, and implementing values correspond to being human? Moreover, what co-opting practices and in which localized contexts may get us there? First, in this conversation, we will discuss what is so on our planet. Then we will brush on climate emergencies and where they originated, resulting in asymmetrical crises in territories like Latin America. Next, we will argue that the future of Latin America is the future of the planet by reframing the narrative of Latin America as a place of reference to discover ways of practicing. Finally, we will uncover techniques, concepts, and research we explore in our studio and in our think tanks when discovering and navigating Latin American worlds. Now, what do we mean by the planet or the planetary? Philosopher Lucas Lifkashkan expresses that it's not a neutral or natural background where humans inhabit. Instead, the planet is a complex living and non-living process. According to theorist Benjamin Bratton, the concept of the planetary suggests both the very small and the very large. Lucas sees the planet as, quote, a series of complex adaptive systems that embody evolutionary processes on different spatial and temporal scales. He takes the example of the mountain valley. It contains many elements: herbs, grasses, trees, mammals, birds, spiders, atmospheric gases, several types of soil, minerals, stones, bodies of water, underground flows, and so on. As a whole, they present an ecosystem, an open system in which organic and inorganic inhabitants, as well as their collectives, metabolize flows of energy, material, and information. The infrastructure built from and within our planet allows for the streaming, for instance, or the recording of this conversation we're having right now. This is known as the stack model, proposed by Benjamin Bratton. He offers these models of layers that fulfill a specific function. For instance, the gold extracted from an African mine flows through the model from the earth layer until it reaches the user layer, which is us, in the palm of our hands. It is so disconnected from the idea of the body that it is understood as something that happens outside, but it does not. The planet and its scales are not outside. Our bodies are the planet. In other words, we are the planet. And interestingly enough, as human beings are, like a quote from Standing, a human being is capable of taking in very few things at a time. We see only what is happening in front of us, here and now, visualizing a simultaneous multiplicity of processes, however they may be interconnected, however they complement each other, is beyond us. And yet we're part of it. Now, let's talk about planetary emergency. We're now in the era called Anthropocene. This refers to the evidence of the human impact on our planet, not only on the visible level, but the geochemical. In other words, the planet we refer to is in a state of deep terraformation. This increases droughts, floodings, mass extinction, ocean acidification, and increased carbon emissions, among many other conditions. Climate injustice emerges from what we call asymmetrical yet smooth geopolitical power dynamic. This colonial legacy led to a global figure in our world. Colonialism consists of the unknown's epistemic sovereignty. In 1494, Pope Alexander VI assigned sovereignty rights to any territory to be discovered in the south and west of Spain and Portugal. It is a totality financed and legitimized in the same sovereignty, in the name, of sovereignty and divinity. It allows this free mobilization to continue the operative image of the global and the exclusion of worlds that do not correspond to that image. A divine right over what is not known. Colonialism and then globalism erases other worlds and other histories. Now, why is this problematic? The way histories, problems, and worlds are formulated with their respective positions and standards, and we're going to quote Turpin here, will get the solutions they deserve according to the terms with which they were created as problems. The conditions that construct these worlds and their stories directly affect design. Architect Fernando Luis Lara exposes histories erased in service of colonial powers. He cites an example, the commissioning of the Tempieto. The Tempieto was commissioned by the Spanish crown to celebrate the conquest of Iberia and the Indias. Quote, kingdoms prosperous by the conquest had a fundamental role in constructing this architectural building. The Tempieto was one of the projects that marked a rupture point in architecture, according to Luis Lara. On how it operates today, architecture turned from explaining how to read the past to prescribing how buildings will be constructed in the future. The discipline as a projection towards the future comes from a global thought. Not because of its impact on form or design, but because of the actions, flows, and resources that led to its materialization. While this occurred, other worlds were being alienated. Now, what are the consequences, especially in Latin America? According to Lucas, ecological of the Holocene and early Anthropocene are simultaneously exercised in colonial and racial violence. Furthermore, we argue that although we are in crisis as a whole planet, this is an asymmetrical crisis. Latin America is zero. Climate change begins in Latin America. This came to be thanks to colonialism. It is still underway through unmeasured, unsupervised, and unsolicited exploitation of Latin American territories and their fauna, their soils, and their oceans. Some examples of its impacts include, to name a few, are on its diverse fauna, like where almost 30% of species are between low risk and critically endangered. Also on its soil, where almost half of South American temperate grasslands have been converted to other land uses or degraded, and only 6% include protected areas. Or in the ocean, where fishing is being increasingly exploited. Critical consequences of climate change manifest specifically in Latin America. Asymmetrical emergencies include deficiency and lack of access to potable water, clean air, and safe community environments. And this includes violence, especially against women. So it is not only a matter that fits into a nifty and packaged term, sustainability. Now, let's talk about a healed planet by design. Latin America is diversity. Around 60% of global terrestrial life, fresh water, and marine systems are within Latin America and the Caribbean. Therefore, it is the most biodiverse region on the planet. Thanks to its diversity, Latin America contributes to the world with food, minerals, manufacturing techniques, knowledge, technology, among many other things. The design for other worlds and a healed planet begins and ends in Latin America. Latin America is a frame of reference. Suppose we picture Latin America not as a geopolitical region, but a planetary geography. Within this geography, we can find practices, techniques, knowledge, forms of life, and designs. Moreover, it is a region to discover other practices and techniques that engage with our planetary emergencies. Now, how may we approach and discover Latin America? First, we understand that there is one planet Earth, but there are multiple worlds. When we say worlds, we refer to UNWELT. The UNWELT model was coined by the scientists Jacob and Yuskul that shows that there is not an external world that is the same, that is unique to all entities. Entities are, according to Sanford Quinter, part of their internal worlds. This means that there is not one, but multiple worlds. Millions of different worlds corresponding to the different entities in our planet. And each entity, according to Cobley, is the constructor of its own world. Citing Quinter again, he says, the world of man, dog, and fly overlap, but they do not correspond. They can happen in the same space, but do not correspond in time, perception, and capacities. There are different worlds, and there are different timescales. For instance, the tick's timescale differs from the dog's. The tick does not know it is on a dog, and it does not care. The goal is the mammal's blood. Its world comprises the signs and signals, allowing it to reach its destiny. The dog, in this case, everything else is empty to her. On the other hand, when we talk about multiple worlds, the concept here of cosmotechnics is important. Cosmotechnics is defined by the philosopher Yu Hui as, quote, scientific and technical thinking emerges under cosmological conditions that are expressed in the relations between humans and their milieus, which are never static. In short, it is the cosmic order and its materialization in techniques and technologies. For instance, we know the Mayan pyramids. What we know is that the way they design and build their cities is based on their way of thinking, their way of living, their beliefs, their customs, and their ritual. This is an example of cosmotechnics. From the framework of understanding that there are multiple worlds and cosmotechnics to discover, we would like to end our conversation by briefly outlining some of the design strategies in our work. Because of a lack of time, we will not expand on the theory behind them. Instead, for today, we will focus on the intention behind these concepts. Now, adhesion. Adhesion delineates segments, areas, or spaces that are illegible, invisible, or uninterpreted. Adhesion allows for a strong union, honoring differences. Adhesion allows two or more entities, elements, and particles that differ from each other to remain open to each other without merging or losing their individual features. In mechanics, adhesion between two substances is possible because of their porosity. Adhesion then may become a method to design designs. With adhesion, diverse groups or normative niches may be temporarily in alliance for the sake of a project. Adhesion does not reject nor accept another group. Still, this joining mechanism may result in a new group that would not have been possible otherwise. The objective is not to change normative niches, but to place them outside themselves for the possibility of a project. However, this vision is only possible if our practices come from a notion of self beyond self, a self at the level of multiple selves. Now, operational architecture. The profession and discipline of architecture have made significant progress in devising strategies and tactics to addressing pressing climate and biodiversity emergencies. However, most of these efforts occur as a slap in the face of buildings or as attempts to reshape form from the existing meaning we give to buildings as they occur as manifestations of the existing homogeneous system. These notions are incomplete and accelerate the existing system's positive feedback loops. By the way, this is a project from Venice Biennale, which Alex and I collaborated for the Italian Pavilion along with Diogo Tudela. The operative purpose of current architecture has been to design buildings as symbolic representations of something. For example, a concept as a party, the big idea that addresses the function of a typology is often informed by meanings of culture and human-centered ideologies. As a result, these designs attempt to be, but are not, in coexistence with other entities on the planet. In the age of climate emergency, actions such as these divide architecture from being part of a planet, sedimenting architecture into the same human-centered world, and the continuation of the constructor of the ontological divide between humans and the planet. Here, architecture is empty and lacks agency. Operational architecture transforms this logic into possibilities of new worlds on a planetary scale and not as canonical sets, rules, or methodologies that react to the outcomes and logic of a system, but are built first as infrastructures for the functioning of the planet. And second, where humans can come to inhabit. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Now I'm going to open it for questions. And I have the first question, I suppose. Within your practice, you sort of a painted architect to the traditional identity of an architect. As we know right now, in majority is someone who designs buildings, gets them done. Traditional. Would you describe that as a colonization of architecture through these practices? Is there because you draw a very distinct picture of architecture as people who should or will assume a responsibility to this world making that will be beneficial to everyone. And it's kind of the logical chart. And can you elaborate on that, the architect's role in all this, please?
Of course, and let me know if I got your question. Thank you, Orhan. So architecture, it's, again, a practice of creating futures, and that's amazing. That's an amazing skill to have. Yet it's important to understand what are the grounds for that practice and that thinking. We need to understand where it comes from. Does it come from, it comes from colonialism and it comes from a global thinking. Is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. Is that something that we want? I don't know. It's something that we can learn from and we can extract from, like we can pull the skills and redirect it towards more like a planetary design or an operational architecture. So the work Alex and I do is mainly about not rejecting, like you said, the conventional way of designing is more like understanding where it comes from and then try to redirect our practice from this modes, like questioning this modes of thinking. And from that point on, and this is why it's very crucial to have a multidisciplinary background or multidisciplinary team, because it allows for us as architects to really pull from other thinking theories, philosophy, and it allows us to think and rethink how we can practice, how can we really, because we all want to, I have to believe, we all want a better future for our planet. And somehow it's getting there very slowly. So what is our role? Our role as architects is, in my opinion, is to rethink these grounds. And like Alex always says, we are the ones that can enable and see many things in one and connect them and reconnect them. So I'm not sure if I understood your question or if I get it, but that's my thinking around that subject.
It explains it in general terms, and I'm pleased to hear that. It's not the subject matter is in here, is not some kind of a revolutionary thinking, but it's like dialectic of a development that we have all the evidence right now. That's where it's going, like you mentioned several times, the climate crisis. And I'm just as curious as anybody else how these things are going to increasingly play a making role into architecture. Like, what do we do from 30 years from now? What we'll be designing is a really a kind of a question that doesn't have any immediate answers.
That's very true. There is no answer. And at the same time, I think when understanding and designing from the planet and thinking that we're not separate, we're not something that is separated from the planet, it really does. It's not a question of balancing nature because we are invaders and we are the villains and we have to change that. It's more like really understanding what's our agency inside these planetary scale systems and what is our, and really discover that there is no one answer that I can give you right now, only that it really, for me, it comes down to really understand the context, which is something that architects do already, but just scale up that context and then try to see how it is connected to the localized, because the local is not separated from the planet. Like, for instance, I live in Tijuana. Tijuana is not just a geopolitical limitation that is like separated, it's planetary as well. So what are the manifestations of the planet that are happening in Tijuana? And from that other frame of reference, other solutions or other proposals or other projects may emerge. Or we can discover other worlds or other ways of thinking from communities, for instance, that are adjacent yet different from us, and then really, really get to understand that. And from that understanding, we can really see, okay, what we can do with this. Now that I know this, what can I do? It's a matter of always questioning what are terms and where does it all come from? And that by itself will create different paths that we may take. For instance, on our practice is about Latin America, but not as a Latin American geopolitical thing that ends and begins where Mexico ends. It's a matter of the planetary Latin Americas.
We have some questions, people asking on the question and answer section. I have to voice them, even though I would have liked to edit some of them, but a unanimous participant is asking you, get ready for this, what are your hobbies outside of architecture? So I don't know, you can just say pass or just say what are your hobbies?
Okay.
If you
so-
just answer me.
I love hiking. Honestly, I love hiking. And I love cooking. So I guess both of them are the main ones. Because they allow me, the thing about hobbies is that they are not separate from my thinking. Hiking allows me to think about the scales and about what I just discussed with you. So that's why it's a valid question, because for me, it's about thinking and discovering this world can only happen by walking the city, if it's safe, of course. But yeah, and to discover the world. So yeah, that's that's the answer to the
Okay,
question.
okay. I was right voicing this question. As another unanimous participant is also asking, how old were you when you first realized the value of the discipline of architectural thinking? Now, that's a kind of a loaded question too.
Yeah, well, architecture, well, I guess it's all honestly thanks to Alex. When I was an intern at his studio, um, he taught me that although we are designing, I remember the first day I'm designing, I'm nervous, and then he says, okay, here are the first two things that you need to do. And I'm like, okay, what? And I'm so nervous. And he says, okay, you need to design these stairs, and then you need to read about object-oriented ontology. And I'm like, what? What is that? And I just remember, and that's where when I read it, and then I start to really understand that. So I guess I was like 21. Yeah, I think around 21 is when I discovered the value of architectural thinking and how it makes a difference in the way you design a stair or a door. That is not something that is separated, and that's something that I learned from Alex as an intern many years ago.
Thank you. Here's another one. Do you know Teddy Cruz? Of course, who doesn't, right? Teddy. I recently learned of him, and by the way, Teddy Cruz has lectured here at the ELAC several years ago, maybe 10. Do you know Teddy Cruz? I recently learned of him, and his book specializing the building blocks and activate or mobilize urban conflict as a catalyst for design. This would be a good question for Teddy himself, but do you have any thoughts on that? If you want me to read it, it's just kind of like a little expanding question.
You got cut off a bit at the beginning, so I just heard, if I know Teddy Cruz, I don't know him in person, but I know who he is.
Okay.
But then that was when I think I was cut off. Maybe
Okay, his book on spatializing justice, on how to create the building blocks and activate or mobilize urban conflict as a catalyst for design. I guess the question encapsulates the recent, the dialectic of questioning things, as we know, especially around the spatial injustice and things like you talk often in Tijuana.
Yeah, well, I cannot talk for in the name of Teddy's work because I'm not Teddy, but I can say that in terms of injustice or spatial injustices, this is where our agency may be frustrating a bit when we focus and we think of architecture as merely building design, and that's all there is. Like we don't get a say or we don't have an influence on what happens inside or outside those spaces. The fact is that Latin America, it's a very violent place, especially towards women. So not only women, of course, but let's just say the minorities. And it is happening on space is that there's a city, there's a city and there's streets and there are buildings there. So it's not separated. How we can do it, I'm not sure yet, because it's not a matter of, oh, let's just put more lighting in it, and or let's just I don't know, track people on an app. It's much more complicated than that. And I think it's a matter of, again, understanding our bodies, and especially our female bodies as planetary. So when violence against women, I argue, is happening, it's a violence against the planet as well. Like those two things are connected. That's what I can say about spatial injustices for now. But I'm not sure I got the question correctly.
I think the question is a little elastic. It could go anywhere, but you kind of touch base with it. I don't know if Brianna, one of our students, is kind of can utilize your answer or interpret it, but it makes a lot of sense to me. Here, as these questions are getting a little bit more sort of complex now. This is from Mickey. What sparked your interest in the idea of how architecture can play a part in these issues that you talked about?
That's an excellent question. For instance, as architects, and I've worked in multidisciplinary circles, so our role usually as architect is very flexible. Like sometimes we we use our skills for graphics or building things or designing things, but most of the time we're very good at designing systems, because we have this ability. This is what Alex says all the time. We have this ability of taking something from this discipline and then this and then this and then that, and then reconnect them. And really, that's design. Design is like taking things and building them into a system or something else. And I think our present planetary emergencies really need architects, not because we're very good at designing buildings, although that's, okay, we will always need buildings, of course. Yet when it comes to a problem that is a human problem, not necessarily an architectural problem, it's a human problem, it really does take architects, because we have this ability. On the other hand, let's just say we focus on buildings. Buildings, I think, are responsible for 35% of carbon emissions in the planet. So it's not just a matter of, oh, let's be sustainable because, you know, it's trending or whatever. It's about the fact that the planet system is being terraformed by these buildings. Therefore, we need to rethink the way we build, or maybe we build less. I don't know. It's about asking ourselves the questions and asking these questions inside these multidisciplinary circles. That's honestly, that I think that's the only way we can actually provide agency, not only as architects, but the rest of the disciplines, is really to gather as humans and rethink our humanity.
Great, thank you. And next one is coincidentally, is it more like a comment, but sort of elaborates on this exact things that you just mentioned. And it's from Madeline, one of our students also. And she says, Madeline, if you can turn on your microphone and ask the question direct, make your comment directly, it would be great too. Can you do that?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So I wanted to say how I loved how you described the different worlds via the flea and the dog, as they both exist separately and together, as the flea doesn't know they're really on the dog and the dog doesn't know how to run the flea. And it's something I feel relates back to when building, how when we build this building, we think, oh, how this will look in this area by itself, how the people work, but we don't really think how it will work in the city itself. And I just wanted to say that it's something that's important to remember when making like architectural systems and designing, etc. So I just wanted to like clarify, like I like that idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madeline, for your comment, and you nailed it exactly. That's it. It's exactly, it's not a standardized way of designing. It's not even within us humans, we have our own worlds, like as women or females or men or in between non-binary, like we build our own world, even though we share the same space. So when designing is very, very, like you said it very beautifully, it's about really taking the time and space and respectfully try to, this is where adhesion comes from, because it's not about, the tick doesn't need to know what a dog is or vice versa. It's about adhesion. It's about, okay, approaching the other's world, not to intervene it or invade it, which is something that is usually done. It's more like a process of joining, so we can create a project that may have not been possible without that adhesion or that joining. And why adhesion? Because it allows for these differences that we have to remain differences, because we don't want to reach the point of being homogeneous and all the same. It's a concept we're working on to try to figure out if there's so much diversity of worlds, and how we can approach that diversity.
Thank you. Your answer is just as eloquent as Madeline's comment, I should say. We have one of our professors here. He has a question. I let Jesus Abril ask a question himself.
Hi, Denise. How you doing? I'm Jesus. I joined the lecture a few minutes late, and I'm not sure if you addressed this, but from what I've caught, there's an interest in sort of this conversation between these natural systems and the planetary systems and human interaction. Considering, you come from Tijuana, are there any specific examples that you may be working on, or you can talk to our students about how you can approach that concept of finding balance with, say, infrastructural projects to deal with natural systems? Or particularly, I'm interested in something like water treatment along the border, or a sort of a system that transcends these borders, right? That sort of transcends these lines, and how you can offer sort of, a response to those systems, and what that may look like moving forward in the future in terms of design, in terms of, moving away or establishing an aesthetic, if you will, and finding a balance between something that represents, that good relationship with people, but also serving a purpose that remedies some kind of problem or issue that the border has.
Of course. I'm thinking of one example. Okay, so for instance, right now, we are working with many projects that are, okay, I'm going to share this very briefly. Alex, a little bit of promotion. We're going to be creative directors for the Venice Biennale Virtual Pavilion, and as a nonprofit that we are launching soon enough, called Pragma, and it's specifically its purpose is to approach this healing by design from a multidisciplinary background. And one of the things that we're doing is approaching communities and projects that are already doing exactly what you are asking. And one of them is, interestingly enough, for instance, in Tecate, which is a city that is very close here, there's a river, and our federal law understands the river as something that you can just divide horizontally, like a plot of land. And this is the way we are taught to that we should design, right? Like you have a land and then you divide it horizontally, as if Earth actually is divided like that. And we're actually doing, and this is from Impladem. It's a project from Impladem and Miguel Montor from Mexico City, and we were having these conversations that how the law, like from the law, the way we design the law, like even not talking about architecture, like the way architects have conversations with lawyers, with public figures actually intervenes and affects the way we understand space, because they understand the river as something that you can just divide. Like, this is allowed here, but this is not allowed there. As if this is not a whole stream entity that surpasses the border, like you're saying, like surpasses the border and then comes back, and then, or is connected to other bodies of water that we may not be able to see. So, at least from my understanding, it's about having those conversations, and the project starts in the conversation. Design starts in the conversation. It doesn't start drawing lines again horizontally, like if Earth is designed that way. It's to really map. We're right now doing some mapping, like mapping what the Earth looks like in these different worlds. And it really, it's more, for me at least, it's more important about mapping this these worlds and how are they connected to the planetary. For instance, there's another project in Brazil where instead of focusing on the Amazons, because it's flashy and trending and it's this very beautiful place, of course, but they're focusing on other plots of land in Brazil where they're doing this, they call it Corridors for Life. And they are creating this mega regional project in the city scale. And the other thing that they said as well is that that's not possible if you don't have conversations with the people who own the land, or the people, or the authorities. So that's why the object or the design of an object, yeah, it's gonna be manifested and materialized at some point. But the agency of us as architects is to engage in the mud of those conversations that are difficult. And maybe I deviated from your question here, but for me, those are two examples that I can think of that we're currently in alliance with, that are working with this thinking of the planet as a system, and yet implementing it, thinking of a localized context. So it is possible, although you cannot do it alone, and you need a team. And again, it's not only an architecture world anymore. We need to learn about other disciplines, what they're doing and how they're acting, how they communicate even. I've learned so much from people who are, again, lawyers and accountants, that the way they speak is a bit more practical and in another sense, and that actually allows us to, oh my God, maybe I can say it a different way, and that also changes the face of the project. Again, I hope I understood your question here, Jesus.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
There's one more question I dug up from the chat. It's from Marisol Vidal, one of our students also. And she's asking, thinking about the climate crisis, how do you design in terms of addressing the issue? Is it in the building materials you choose? Is it not disturbing the landside around you? I've also heard someone saying that architects no longer design for the ages, that they design for now, and then those buildings are torn down of, for example, classical Roman architecture that are still standing and are still considered beautiful by most. What do you think about that? Like, how do we design for a climate crisis, materiality of it, or the conceptual, maybe she didn't ask that, but I am also adding to that question. How do we do that? These are all big questions, Denise. I don't want to put you on the spot like that.
No, it's fine.
They
It's
want
fine.
to know, like the opinions about that.
Yeah, I'm going to address the question in many parts, probably. First of all, the fact that we know that there's a climate crisis, it's a result from the planetary infrastructure that we built. So we built this infrastructure that is large scale and we can connect each other. And we have these satellite images and we have these sensory apparatuses, and that is how we know the climate is changing or our geology is changing, right? So the fact that our way of building cities, our planet is already it is like a snail is like eating its own tail, right? Like, we need to design more systems that are able to understand the systems more, but that implies more energy, more intervention, more design, more buildings, and that's the question that you're addressing, Marisol, right? I hope I pronounced it correctly. So yeah, it's gonna be contradictory. It's gonna be frictional. It's not gonna be all easy, one answer, one solution, because the fact is, what you need to really sense the change or reverse the change, or like Bratton says, reverse the terraforming into other terraforming, you need to intervene. You need some scale of intervention. There's no way around intervention. And it's not about maintaining this image of nature that we think nature is in the first place. And I think it comes to that. That's the second part. We think of nature as parks with trees, and I don't say I'm saying you, but that's the general idea of what nature is. And we talk about balance and equilibrium. Yet nature, I mean, the planet is not in equilibrium, even before us humans. The entrance of oxygen, the first time oxygen was like created on Earth, was a disruption to the whole planet as well, just as much as we're having right now, and at a more accelerated pace. So it's not about balance. I think it's about really, as architects, understanding what's our time frame over here. Like, what are we able to build? Not as like for now, like you said, but more thinking of long-term projects that, because that's what it takes. Those are the kind of plans that we need to re-terraform in a way our planet. And again, it's not about balance. It's about I think it's about taking responsibility, and yet not putting ourselves in the villain category. It's about taking responsibility for the fact that our brains demand this way of living and this way of thinking and this way of practicing, and extend that and be aware of other entities in the planet. I think that's the best way that I can answer that question.
Okay, there's one more and then we'll finish it. I have a class after this one too, on top of it. One person is asking if you have an Instagram account. I would answer that, just enter ESTUDIO Santander. Probably you will find tons of information. But anyway, do you have the Instagram account? Okay.
I do. I'm a millennial, so I do have an Instagram account. But but I want to take this opportunity to say to all of you that are hearing this, if you want any more information, or if you want us to send you some readings or some notes, or even like, for instance, we have this, or had asked me to tell you also about this nonprofit Alex and I are part of. We co-funded Sala. You can follow that nonprofit as well, where we basically design and organize events around architecture conversation and the future of architecture in Latin America. So that's something that you can also follow. Pragma is about to launch its official website. It's not on yet. That's why it was pre-official statement here. But yeah, I have an Instagram account, or I can share it with the rest of you if you want. And if you want any references or want to have any conversation at all, I'm free to have conversations about these subjects. And I know Alex as well, because again, I think I said this at the beginning, but before we recorded, everything I'm saying in representation of a team. And Alex Santander is my team. And we created these concepts together. We work together. So again, I want to give Alex credit that right now he's being just watching me, but he's also part of the work. So I want to include him. If you want to follow Alex, I think he's the one that shares more about thoughts and on social media more than I do. So follow him as well. And also thank you, Orhan, for the invitation. And he's a great supporter for us at Sala as well. So thank you, Orhan. But yeah, short answer, yes, I have an Instagram account.
Well, I'm looking forward to next week's event, and I'll be there with Michael Rotundi. And soon enough, we'll have dinner again. Thank you so much for it's been very interesting, engaging talk. A little bit different than what our students are accustomed to. Instead of talking about the building, you more talked about life and death issues of architecture, but not only architecture, about life, about us, about our worlds. And I cannot say enough thank you for that, both you and Alex, of course. So this concludes our lecture. This will be also available in we have the lecture series Facebook page, and it will be available there live, a recorded version of it after we have minor edits on it. And also we are looking forward to meet again in 2 weeks for Marceline Gall. She's the undergraduate program director at SCI-Arc, and on May 19, we'll have Doris Song. She's also the head of architecture undergraduate school at USC. So we are looking forward to see all of you again, and thank you for the being the opening move on this lecture series. Okay.